Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and I am a Canadian knitter. I'm based in the absolutely beautiful northeast of England. I live up close to the sea, not too far from Newcastle, but I am joining you today from London. We've come down south to visit some family that's unfortunately not doing very well. So I am just kind of sat in a corner. I'm just stealing a couple minutes, and I only brought one knitting project with me. One whip, which was in fact not a whip when I brought it. I really just brought the materials for a project that I planned to start, which worked out really well in some ways and you know, brought up its own complications in other ways. So I only have one work in progress to talk to you about, but it's one that I'm quite excited about and one that I think I have a lot to say. I mean, I always have a lot to say, don't I? I'm a bit wordy, but it's one I think I have some hopefully interesting things to say about. So that is what the plan is for today. Before we jump into talking about the exact project I'm working on today, I did think it might be worth just taking a minute to kind of give a little bit of context for my last kind of month of knitting, because I haven't done an update, a kind of general knitting update since before the holidays in December. And I have been doing quite a bit of knitting since then, but all of that knitting is a little bit secret, just because I've been working on projects that in my mind are attached to another kind of literary knitting project and to a book that I read this autumn that I was really excited about and thought that it might be fun to share with you all. So that's kind of sectioned off as a bit of a plan and maybe accounts for, I mean, I wouldn't have mountains of knitting to show you even if I showed you everything that I've been working on, but that's part of why I only have the one whip to show you today. It's not like there are other things sitting at home that I would be talking to you about if I had brought them with me. So that I did want to give you a bit of context for, but really the main reason I wanted to tell you about that knitting is because of the yarn that I was using. Because the knitting that I have been doing for those videos has been entirely in Briggs and Little Heritage yarn, which is woolen-spun, worsted weight yarn. It's 100% Canadian wool, and it comes from the oldest still running woolen mill in Canada, which is Briggs and Little, and it's based in New Brunswick, and just amazing. I'm in love with this yarn. And I've spoken before about wanting to moderate, I guess, the number of worsted weight or bigger knitting patterns that I take on or that I work on. It seems like the more I decide that I want to work on smaller gauge projects, the more in love I am with projects knit at a bigger gauge. But I've made that decision to kind of try to minimize the number of worsted weight projects, or at least maybe a better way to put it is just to balance them out with some smaller gauge projects. And I've decided that for a number of reasons. The first is I definitely notice that I can feel some anxiety if I get through projects too quickly. And that's a me issue, but you know, I find that balancing that out with some slower projects, some projects that take me a bit more time, works really well for me. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that I'm definitely learning that having a longer term project suits my knitting requirements. The kind of, it suits the need that knitting fills in my life really well. Because I quite enjoy the kind of decision-making process at the beginning of a project where you pick your yarn and the pattern and you decide, in my case, what gauge you're going to knit it at, because I almost never knit patterns exactly at gauge. And you kind of make all of those decisions and make decisions about any big modifications that you might make. But it's quite nice also, I think, once that period of decision-making is done, to have quite a bit of extended knitting time on that project, to just kind of have that project be a companion with you for a long time. And, you know, have it be fairly stress-free knitting, because you don't really, you know, I mean, there are always things that go wrong and you need to think, but for the most part, you're kind of settled and you're just knitting. So that's kind of part of why I was both in love with the heritage yarn and was conscious that I wanted to get away from that if I could. And the compromise was, and what I will be knitting in today is Briggs and Little Sport. So here's one of their labels. I quite like that their labels are quite kind of small and minimalist. You can see that it's 100% wool and it's a 1-ply. So I spent an evening kind of looking at Briggs and Little yarn online and decided that knitting in the sport weight would be the best of all worlds for me. And often I find that kind of patterns I want to knit come first and I match them up with yarn. In this case, it was very much the other way around. I realized that I wanted to buy some of this yarn while I was still in Canada. It's quite easy to get a hold of while you're in Canada, and quite affordable as well, I should say. Kind of goes for kind of $7 Canadian per 113 grams. I think it's 4-ounce balls, that's why they're over 100 grams. Need to confirm that, I don't remember the ounces exactly, but it's about 113 grams per ball. And they go for kind of $7 Canadian and slightly up depending on which retailer you're buying them from. So quite affordable, and this is what I knew I wanted to knit my next project with. So I sat down and was looking at the colors, but also starting to think about patterns. And the pattern that I chose is one that I have wanted to knit for a long time, but I hadn't cast it on because I really couldn't think of what yarn in my stash I would use. I didn't have anything appropriate in my stash, and I just couldn't picture what colors I would use. So this was kind of the perfect coming together of all the factors that I would need. And I'm sure I've put this in the title, so you will know already, but I chose the Polina Pullover by Teddy Lutzak. And this, I think, is the absolute perfect pairing. The Teddy Lutzak pattern is knit in a sport weight, though at a gauge that is a little bit too airy for me, a little bit too big for me, so I've played with that, and I will talk about that a little bit. It's knit at 24 stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. But it's also knit in a sport weight woolen-spun yarn. So in lots of ways, a really good match for this yarn. Now the other thing that had kept me back from doing this pattern, as I mentioned, was the color. I just couldn't, I often look at a pattern and think right away, ooh, I want to knit it in this color, or ooh, this color scheme would be fun. And even if I play with that later, I kind of often have a sense of where I want to start. And with this pattern, I've never really had that. I've been a bit stuck. And I think that's partially because her pattern is knit up so beautifully. I really like Teddy Lutzak, the colors that she often uses for her sample pieces. She wears a lot of kind of earthy, warm colors. Her Polina Pullover is knit in a kind of oatmeal as the base color, and I think it's so beautiful, and I think I am in love with her sample piece. But I just don't like oatmeal on me. I find it washes me out. I don't feel like myself when I wear it. So I think that was one of the roadblocks, is I both really liked that and was a bit stuck on that. I knew that I actually wouldn't wear a sweater if I knitted up in those colors. But in addition to finding this Briggs and Little yarn over the last couple of months, the other thing that has really changed since I last really kind of sat down and looked at how I could knit the Polina Pullover is that so many other people have knit it. So there are now almost 600, I think we're really just shy of 600 patterns listed on Ravelry, which is so amazingly helpful. I am a big fan of Ravelry. I am very aware that there are still some accessibility issues, and if there's anything that I can do to help anyone, this is a kind of, there's not much we can do, is there, as just users of the website. But if there's anything that I've mentioned on the website that you're interested in and you have accessibility issues with the website, you can't use it for whatever reason, please do reach out and I'll do my best to help or translate it, or, I don't know, are we allowed to screenshot just sections of the web? I'll do anything I can to help, because I think that is really tricky, and it's a real shame because Ravelry is such a wonderful resource. And my favorite part of Ravelry is definitely other people's projects, being able to look at how other people have knit up patterns, how they fit, what modifications they've made, what issues they've had, what colors they've chosen. When I'm choosing yarn, especially if I'm buying online, I love to go and look at how it's knit up for other people, how it photographs in different lights. So I think that's absolutely wonderfully helpful. And the patterns for the Teddy Lutzak pattern, the Polina Pullover, those projects are just amazing. And I went and just fell immediately in love with Evapastorp's, my second Polina Pullover. I'm sorry, I've definitely mispronounced her username. I believe she's Finnish, and she's just an absolutely beautiful knitter. I'm in love with all of her knits. She's knit the Polina Pullover, as her title, my second Polina Pullover, suggests. She's knit the Polina Pullover several times really now. I think she knit one even in a kind of linen with short sleeves for summer. Absolutely beautiful. But her second Polina Pullover is one of the project spotlights, and it is just gorgeous. I quite like the project spotlight function on Ravelry, which must be designers who are in charge of that, right? I mean, it couldn't be anyone else. But it seems to me that designers often use it in quite a clever way to spotlight people who've done really, really clever, beautiful projects, but also projects that are quite different from their sample piece to help you envision it in different ways. And this sample piece is very different from, or this finished project is very different from the sample Polina sweater. It's knit in kind of 2 shades of green, a darker green and a lighter green, and a beautiful yellow. And that decided it for me. So I knew that that was kind of a color scheme that was an inspiration for me, a goal for me, and I knew that I wanted to do Briggs and Little yarn. So let me show you, I've been rambling away at you and I haven't actually shown you what I'm knitting. So let me hold up so that we can get some context. These are my colors. See that? And I'm just in love. So I don't think I'm going to share, I've been thinking about it a little bit, I don't think that I'll share in my video any pictures of Vaperstarp's Polina Pullover. It feels different to me to share someone's project when they've shared it but don't necessarily expect it to ever leave the realm of Ravelry. That feels very different to me than sharing what are essentially marketing materials when you're sharing a designer's pictures of their sample project. So I won't share that just because that feels like a bit of a, something I would want to confirm with her first, and I haven't done that. But I will link it below. It is very easy to find this project because it is one of the spotlighted patterns. And if you go and have a look, you will see that my greens are very different from her greens. And I think that, as is the case for me whenever I'm conscious of taking inspiration from a different source or a different pattern, I was a bit disappointed at the differences initially in the greens that she had and the greens that were available to me in the Briggs and Little Sport. Her greens are kind of more on the yellow side. They're quite warm greens, I guess. And the Briggs and Little greens are much bluer, as you can see. And I was a bit disappointed with that initially, but I think, as is almost always the case for me, as soon as I actually started knitting with the greens, these greens have now supplanted the inspiration greens in my mind because this is what I'm actually working with and looking at all the time and I've spent several hours looking at now, and I'm in love with them. And I think that actually the cooler greens suit me much better. Her sweater looks so beautiful on her. I just want to be her, really, in that pattern project, right? I think that's often the feeling that I have when I look at a sweater that I really want. It's kind of like, oh, that looks like a beautiful day and a beautiful garden to be standing in. But I think that these greens actually suit me much better. And even before I got to the point where I was just working with the greens, I knew that I was going to have to make a kind of distinction, move myself away from her pattern because of the yellow. And the yellow in her pattern that she's using for the flowers is a really lovely, quite subtle yellow. And the only yellow that Briggs and Little had is quite golden. And I just wasn't in love with it. I thought it was going to stand out too much. I think what I quite like about the inspiration sweater is the kind of subtlety and the way it makes me think of kind of new spring flowers and the kind of quieter flowers, the flowers that aren't necessarily bright pinks or reds or oranges, but are kind of a quiet yellow or even a white. So what I decided initially, and you'll know that this is not what I've gone with because it's not in my sweater, but this is one of my initial swatches. I swatched a lot for this pattern, but this is one of my initial swatches, and I went with an undyed white from Briggs & Little. And I'm both really, I think this is beautiful. And I was kind of so focused on, I played quite a bit with gauge for this pattern. And I don't think I'll go into this too much today because it could become really unwieldy and take up a lot of time. But this pattern, because of the nature of the motif and the motif being quite large, there are large gaps between the sizes. And that's not I don't mean that as a criticism of the pattern at all. I think that's just the nature. You know, she's quite upfront with that. She writes that in the description of the project, of the pattern. That's just the nature of grading this kind of large motif in a circular yoke. So I knew that I wanted to knit it at a tighter gauge than the pattern actually calls for. That's not too terrible. I do that quite often, so I'm comfortable with kind of how many variables that throws into kind of uncertainty or flexibility. And that's all right. But I also knew that I wanted it to be bigger than size 1 and quite a bit smaller than size 2. So I did quite a bit of swatching. So this was my first swatch, and I had been so focused on needle size and finding a fabric that I liked, and finding a fabric that I liked where the math of that fabric would give me a sweater size that I was happy with, that I wasn't really looking at the colors too much. So it wasn't until I cast this one off and was ready to put it in the bath to block it that I really looked at the colors. And maybe you won't be seeing the same thing as me, but I looked at this and immediately thought, I mean, I think it's very pretty, but I immediately thought of 8-bit flowers. These look so much to me like the kind of flowers you have to jump over in the old Super Mario Brothers video games, like the old Nintendo games. I don't know if anyone else is seeing that. I kind of thought that, and when I showed it to my partner, he immediately said, oh my god, they're Super Mario Brothers flowers. So that confirmed to me that it was going to bug me. I think that it would have looked very different in a full sweater. You know, I think that that would have broken it up a bit more and it might have been just fine. I was quite sad about deciding not to use the white because January and February to me are kind of all about snowdrops in the UK. You know, my friends in the northern parts of North America, in Canada, and kind of the northern states in the US. I'm so sorry to say this because I know that you've got months and months of snow ahead of you, but we've already got some snowdrops popping up and blooming here in London. There's some in my in-laws' back garden, which just still shocks me after, you know, I've been here almost 9 years, something like that now, and it still shocks me every year that the flowers come out so quickly in the new year. So I really loved that idea of kind of really simple, gentle, white and green flowers, or, you know, cow parsley as we're moving into the summer months. And I was really in love with that color combination. But in the actual pattern, it just looked like Super Mario Brothers to me, which is fun, and an association that isn't negative to me at all, but it's not what I was going for, you know? So I did another swatch in just the 2 greens, and this I'm much happier with. And I think that this still has that kind of subtlety of the small flowers, especially some of those white flowers, the snowdrops, just before they open and show you all the white. So a little bit of a shame that the 3 colors didn't work out together. But luckily, the balls, the Briggs and Little balls, are big enough that this should be fine. The one, I bought the last ball of this fern green color from the shop that I got them from. They didn't have any more, but luckily this one ball should be plenty to do all of the color work I want to do. So that's what I ended up choosing. So as I just said, this is fern green from Briggs and Little, and the darker green is just called dark green. I should double check myself. Yes, just dark green. And I'm in love with them. I think that they're so beautiful. So I hope that wasn't too laborious for you, but I find it really interesting to think about how we arrive at colors that really please us, and what's going to make for a sweater that we really love. I really like color, and I'm trying to make a bit of an effort to knit with a bit more color, especially at the start of the year this year. I just feel like it's a bit of an infusion of, I don't know, the natural wool colors give me so much joy, but I've just been feeling the need for a specific color joy in the last little while. So I'm making a bit of an effort to knit with more color, and I really enjoy wearing color, but I don't always feel like those decisions come super naturally to me, so I thought that it might be helpful for me to talk it through, and hopefully interesting for you as well. I really find it valuable when people whose color choices I really admire talk about how they arrived at them. Even if it is just a case of, you know, in this case I really took inspiration from this other beautiful knitter and her projects. So that's how I arrived at these colors. I am knitting this in the size 2, but I am hoping I'm knitting it on 3.75 millimeter needles, which I am a very tight knitter. So I'm, 0.25, I'm one size up from the main needle called for in the pattern, but I'm going to have a much smaller gauge. I was thinking that it might be interesting, I might talk about that a bit next time, a bit more, kind of how, I don't know if that would be interesting for you, maybe you can let me know, but I almost never knit patterns at the gauge that they call for, so I thought that it might be interesting, in this case especially because I did more swatching than usual and more thinking than usual, because I really had a fairly specific size of sweater that I had in mind of what I wanted in the end result, and it was a bit tricky to make that match up with a fabric that I was happy with. I did get there. I think this is going to work really well. But if that would be helpful for me to, if that would be interesting, please do let me know. I think it would be fun to chat through that, a bit of the math and kind of the other variables that get thrown into the air, as it were, when you decide to go off-piste and knit at a different gauge, because it really does kind of change in a subtle way, but it changes lots of things about the fit of the sweater overall and about how much yarn you're going to need and all sorts of things like that. I don't think I'll talk about that today because I'm conscious that we could be talking about this sweater for quite a long time today. I think it would be nice to keep this maybe a little bit shorter than usual. So I'm knitting this on the second size. One thing I will say about the gauge, and my gauge being quite different, is I like the way that the neck fits in the sample pattern, in Teddy Lutzak's sample project. And I knew that knitting at a tighter gauge, I used a 3 millimeter needle for the neck, and I knew that that was going to result in a much tighter neckline than hers. And I didn't know if I loved that. And when I first opened the pattern and started kind of really reading how the neckline was going to work, because it's this really beautiful ruffle neck, so much, the details in this pattern are really extraordinary, is something that I haven't said but should say. The details are just extraordinary. And you cast on, I won't give you any of the numbers since it's a paid pattern, but you cast on a slightly smaller number of stitches for size 2 than for size 1, which is a little bit unusual. And it's not a huge number of stitches, so it wouldn't make a huge difference, but because I was a little worried about the neck being smaller anyways, I initially decided to cast on size 1 for the neck, and then I would knit the body in size 2. And I got quite far. I got all the way down into kind of this third, you knit a slightly wider section, a slightly smaller section, and then a slightly wider section again. I got down into the third section before I realized that that wasn't going to work. And the reason that wasn't going to work, or it would have worked, but it wasn't going to be as, it was going to compromise some of what I love about this sweater so much. And the reason for that is that this pattern is so well thought out and the details are so clever. Because I don't know if you can see, but there are these kind of valleys in the rib stitch. It's kind of a more typical rib stitch, but every once in a while there's one of these valleys where you can see it's a mix of purl bumps and knit stitches. And each of those valleys, what's the best way to show you this? Maybe like this. Each one of those valleys translates into the edge of a colorwork segment. So you get these beautiful lines running from the neckline through the colorwork section of the sweater. And I kind of felt silly that I hadn't realized how that would work initially, but I think it's one of those things where I read through the neck shaping portion of the pattern and just couldn't really visualize it. I had to get it on my needles to see what was happening. And as soon as I realized what was happening, I kind of put the pattern down for a minute, took a deep breath, ripped it all out, and cast on size 2. Because I think in this case, having a slightly smaller neckline is so well worth being able to preserve those lovely details. Which is just the sign of a really thoughtful pattern, I think. I did quite a bit of ripping back for this. I think I mentioned early on that this is the only project that I brought with me to London, and that has both been really good and been a bit frustrating at times. And it has been really good because I've made quite a bit of progress. I've made more progress than if I'd brought something simple with me, I think. And it's been a bit of a shame because there were times, you know, we're visiting with family and we've been in and out and doing various things, and in some ways it would have been nice, I think, to have something a little bit more mindless, something that didn't require so much concentration. But that's all right. One of the other issues that I had along those lines was that I just wasn't very happy with my tension. I decided initially not to do ladder back jacquard, which is one of the ways that she recommends, that Teddy Litzek recommends, that you could deal with the longer floats that the pattern requires. And initially, you know, because they're quite short sections where you need longer floats. And I just kind of thought, it's not going to be worth setting up the ladder back jacquard. I won't worry about it this time. And I just caught my floats as normal. And I think it was a combination of my stress levels have been a bit up and down this week. My stress always affects my health and affects my hands and inflammation markers and levels. And so my tension was probably a bit uneven anyways, because sometimes my hands were quite healthy and knitting at my normal tension, and when I'm more swollen I tend to loosen up a bit, I've noticed. So I just wasn't really happy with my tension, and I really wasn't happy with the tension of my floats. I think in other circumstances it might have been okay, but it was frustrating this way. And that's where I found myself wishing that I had brought a pair of socks with me or something like that, where it wouldn't matter and it could just be a bit mindless. So it was a bit frustrating to kind of, I'm not happy with this. I feel like it's a combination of things. I'm not quite with it enough this week to be working on this kind of project. So I had a couple moments of frustration like that. But once I sorted it out, I pulled it back. Can I show you? So here are my floats. I think you can kind of see that up until here I'm not doing any ladder back jacquard. And then I start doing some ladder back jacquard in here. And as soon as I handled that and sorted that out and was re-knitting, I think having a more complicated pattern with me was good. It's been a great distraction. It's been a great, outlet, and has been really enjoyable. The pattern isn't difficult. I don't want to suggest that the long floats make this difficult in any way. I think it was a me issue and a reflection of my life in my knitting issue, which I imagine happens to all of us. But it was just something for me to kind of work out and handle a bit this week. And now that I am on the go again with ladder back jacquard, I'm really, really happy. So that's kind of where I am with this. I am speeding along now. I'm probably, 2/3 of the way, 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through that first, depending on whether you're counting rows or volume of stitches, since it gets bigger towards the end, but kind of 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through that first motif. And I'm just in love with the motif. I'm really in love with those greens. I think that they're going to be really good spring colors for me. I'm excited to have this off my needle so that I can wear it as the flowers start to come out a bit. And I'm excited. It seems to be coming out at the size that I want it to be. So that is where I am with my knitting. That is really, this is what I'm really considering my first knit of January 2025, my first 2025 knitting project, and it's serving me really well. I've been having a lot of fun with the pattern and the yarn, and even the little roadblocks. I think I quite like a knitting project that throws me a couple of curveballs so that I have to do a bit of thinking and a bit of problem solving. I don't always love it while it's happening, but I think afterwards it feels like an accomplishment. It feels like, just a bit of problem solving is not a terrible thing. And frogging, often I don't mind once it's already happened. I'm not suggesting that I'm like, ooh, I get to frog every time that happens, because that is definitely not accurate. I always have a minute of, but after the fact, I'm often able to reframe it for myself, and I think that problem solving becomes kind of a fun puzzle that's part of the project. So, is that the case for you? I'm always really interested. I feel like many of us change our attitudes towards different roadblocks in our knitting as time goes on, and it's always really interesting to see where we settle with those things and how they impact our feelings about the projects. I think it would be a shame if any of those roadblocks had made me feel dissatisfied with the project or less excited about eventually being able to wear the sweater, but that is not the case. So I think I'm fortunate that way. So that is everything that I will ramble at you about today. We've got a bit of sun coming out as I've been talking to you. It has stopped raining and the sun has come out, which is very exciting. So I might go tromp around a bit and see if I can find any snowdrops that are in bloom. And I hope that you are enjoying your knitting and enjoying a bit of outdoor time wherever you are in the world right now. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me, and I hope to touch base with you again soon. Thanks so much.